podcast 8, I spoke with Ryan Higgins. I first met Ryan when I began working in China. We worked together for the same company. He's a dude that's very funny, always interested in learning new things, and I believe he has got a very kind and empathetic heart. He's an American man, but he's been living for the last 15 years in China. I hope that you can enjoy this talk that I had together with him. If you want to know what the topics are in this video, then you can look in the description box below. The podcast will now begin. So, what's your definition of bias or biases?
So a bias, in my definition, is just kind of the way that you almost view the world or facts. Sometimes these biases can be a good thing, and sometimes they can be a bad thing. And we all have them. Everybody has them. Even people that are very conscious of these things, they try not to let these come through and influence decisions or emotions, but everybody has them, and we all display them in one form or another.
Okay, and so I'm assuming that all of our biases are culturally conditioned based on like the places that we've lived and how we've been educated. Is that right?
Yes, so some of them are influenced by culture, your education, your upbringing, life experiences, things that you like, things that you don't like.
So
I mean,
then,
pretty much almost all aspects of your life are going to play some part in your biases, your biases.
okay, and so then if that's the case, then would it, so that like it kind of does, like where a child is living, the conditions in where it's living and how it's educated, that's going to affect what kind of biases the child has. Is it based on what you're saying? Is that correct, or is it incorrect, or does it depend?
So that will have a part of it, yes, because where you're brought up at, that culture, that education influences the way that people think, the way people do things, and that will have a big influence on your biases. Yes.
Okay, cool. So I wrote this little excerpt. Like I have a certain thought process on biases, and I'm curious to know if you agree with it. So um, I wrote, often people seek out information that confirms that the way they perceive the world is correct. In addition to this, there is confirmation bias, the tendency, which the definition from Google is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. And then my opinion is, I personally obviously have biases, like you're saying everybody does. But this people who at least appear, maybe I'm wrong in my thinking, but they appear to have less biases, or they're more honest with themselves about their biases. They seem to be, the way I interpret their personality, is being more open-minded. Do you agree with this? Is there a correlation between open-mindedness and being more honest with yourself about your biases, or having less biases, or is there no correlation there?
So there is a bit of a correlation there. So as I mentioned before, some people are very conscious of these biases that they have, and they try not to let them through so much. They try to objectively think about something and look at actual facts versus just, oh, well, I don't like that, so whatever that is can't be true or it's wrong. As some people will seek out the actual facts, but as you mentioned before, there's a lot of confirmation bias in a lot of things that you see, especially on social media or things like that. You see a lot of people kind of group together over this one idea, and they'll reject anything outside of that idea, no matter the evidence that's provided to them. They'll find some way to discredit your information just because it doesn't fit into their own little vision of how they see the world.
Do you think this is like a random thought that came into my mind? Do you think that's because of some kind of a tribal kind of thing where like people feel insecure as like an isolated individual, so then they seek to have a community, a tribe, and by doing that, they identify with like a particular ideological worldview, and then they try to attack those who are not on the tribe because this is like their support community. Do you think there's a
Oh
correlation
yeah,
between? Yeah.
definitely, definitely. Because you see this with religion, you see this with many different things. So a good example that I like to use for this is uh, you see how people now will talk about how there's a rise in some kind of ideology, some thought
Yeah.
pattern, and they say, "Well, it's getting worse. It's worse than it's ever been." But if you really think about it, this is all brought about by the internet, by social media. The people can connect with each other easier than ever before. So these people before were isolated in small pockets wherever they lived. And as you mentioned, they probably had this feeling of isolation. They didn't vocalize these ideologies as much as they can now when they see other people on the internet that think the same way as them. And that will lead to a confirmation bias of like, well, look at all these other people that think the same way as me. So I must be correct. There must be something here. And again, maybe what they're thinking is completely wrong. And no matter what evidence you provide these people, they'll discredit it in whatever way they can. And that's very easy with the internet because if you just Google, for example, you can Google search anything.
Yeah.
And if you use the right terminology to search, you'll find results that will back whatever you believe.
Yeah. People are writing articles about everything, and yeah. Yep. Interesting. So before we leave, what I touched on before, what's the ultimate objective with biases? Are we trying to just be honest with ourselves about it? Are we trying to be more open-minded and just objectively view our biases and concepts as with as much awareness and honesty as we can? Or is there more to it? Or is that we're trying to like entertain new concepts that contradict our own personal biases and beliefs, and that helps us to navigate getting closer to the truth? Is that pretty much it, or is there more that the individual needs to do?
So, one thing that people should try to do is challenge your beliefs, whatever it
Challenge.
is. Challenge them. Look for things that are going to go against them. Look for the evidence against what you believe, and then weigh those things together. See what could be true, because there's a lot of false information out there, and a lot of a lot of experts that really don't know much about what they're writing about. Maybe they've watched a couple documentaries on YouTube, maybe they've read articles and things like this, and all of a sudden they become an expert in something. And you quickly
Sounds like
can
me.
see we're all guilty of it. This is something that most people are guilty of. And it's it's just part of the human condition, I think.
Yeah.
It our biases lead us to believe that we're right, we're smart. They lead us into groups of people, the tribal aspect that you were talking about. So these are things that are very difficult for a lot of people to kind of wrestle with in their life. These biases sometimes just shine through, and there's not really much that the person can do. And that's the sad part. Because now, with the rise of the internet, it's so easy to go and find actual facts, undisputable facts that It's true, whether you like it or not. It's just, are you able and willing to take in that information and say, okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe what I've been putting out there for however long, some people many years, maybe this challenges that. Maybe I need to start thinking different.
Right on. Okay, so let's talk about but I don't know if we can even talk about this, but like biases from an evolutionary standpoint. Is this like a type of conceptual or psychological mutation, or is this not, does this have nothing to do with mutation? And whether it's mutation or not mutation, how does it benefit our species, or is it like a mental disease, or can it be both beneficial and harmful? Yeah.
So, from a mutation standpoint, now this may seem like a bias to people, but evolution is mutations that build up over time. So I would imagine that because we have the ability to have these biases, that it would be some sort of mutation that developed, I don't know when. I'm not sure which ancestor of the human race was the first one to be able to say, hey, you know, we believe this over that, and whatever you provide to show us that we're wrong, we're just going to reject this.
Yeah. Something happened.
And biases, they can be good, they can be bad, but even a bias that somebody perceives as good, even if the overall idea behind it is good, can be bad because maybe you're rejecting something bad in your life or in humanity, in society. You refuse to believe it or whatever, and that can lead to that problem persisting over time, not being solved, not being taken care of. So even a good bias can turn out to be bad because you'll tend to ignore a potential problem that may pop up down the road, or something that's just overall bad for the people around you or your society, your tribe, so to say.
Okay, so that makes me think like maybe I have a misconception, but like it seems like most, if not all, mutations that continue in our species have some kind of benefit, but then there could be certain faulty mutations that continue with us as a species, or relatively harmless mutations that can stay with us as a species. So maybe this conceptual mental bias thing, maybe it's a relatively harmless mutation that has stuck with us as a species, or maybe its primary function is to help us to stay within tribes, which help us to survive or something like that. I don't know.
Well, normally in evolution, a mutation that serves a purpose is what's going to survive and carry on.
Yeah.
Mutations that go against your environment usually will die off. Now, for people, biases, you mentioned two good things. They could be good, they could be bad. So, good as in maybe they kept us in these groups of people, these tribes, and that has made it easier for us to survive. There's more people to, thousands of years ago to hunt and gather food. There's more people, later on after hunting and gathering with agriculture. There's more people to work your crops, to work agriculture. But at the same time, if you think about it, biases have probably led to most war, most genocide, and things like this. So you can, back through history, you can see that most war, most conflict is bias related, because maybe it's religion, maybe it's land disputes, maybe it's whatever it is. It's
Okay.
always going to stem from, I'm right, you're wrong, therefore I'm going to kill you.
Hmm. So maybe it could even be beneficial from a bird's eye perspective for population standpoint, not overpopulating a particular area and then perpetuating wars and lowering populations. Um, maybe like it's maybe mutations don't just function from a species standpoint, but from a very high bird's eye perspective, function like interspecies, like the mutations cause people to survive in their tribe and to help support each other and self-identify with a certain perspective or worldview. And then they're so strongly attached mentally to their views that they're willing to go to war with each other. And then this helps to lower the population. So then it doesn't, the humans don't affect that environment too much. So then it's like I wonder, sometimes I wonder that like if certain mutations are like more bird's eye and not just trying to help the species survive, but trying to collectively, I don't know, but maybe not because the humans are fucking up the world so much. Um,
Yeah, because now, I mean, I wouldn't. Hmm, that's a good question.
the symbiotic
So,
relationships between plants and animals or fungi and plants, they is that a relationship that they develop with each other purely out of self-interest, or is it a mutation? I don't know. That's because relationships aren't mutations, right? They're just the cleverness of that in that the intelligence of that species to recognize that it can have a that this relationship will benefit them, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So most of the time, those kinds of relationships are going to be beneficial to both things that is involved in it. So you may have a fungus that grows underground, and when the plants make their energy or substance from the sun,
Yeah.
water, the soil, maybe the fungi are able to draw some of that and survive off of that. But you also have parasitic relationships where one thing is just taking from something else and not providing anything.
Yeah.
So some of these relationships are parasitic in nature. And
Yeah.
that wouldn't necessarily be a mutation, but a
Yeah.
relationship that's only beneficial for one party.
Yes. Okay. I need to try to be less of a parasite and more of kind of symbiotic character. Okay.
Oh, you're not a parasite, man. Not at all.
Thanks for the words of encouragement. Ditto. Uh, you said that someone could have a bias to thinking that they're smart. And then we also know that some people can have a bias to thinking they're stupid. And then we know like about self-fulfilling prophecies where like if an individual is like always the bias to think that they're stupid, and then they always think that, and then that they kind of fulfill that type of thinking by not taking the actions to become more clever or intelligent or knowledgeable. So in this sense, this bias, can it be like a disease, a mental disease? Can biases can be like an individual or collective disease sometimes in some situations, or
I don't think it would be a disease by the definition,
Mhm.
although it could be viewed as one when it comes to some of the harmful biases that we see. But what I think you're talking more about there would be self esteem,
Mhm.
where maybe somebody, when they're being raised, is, oh, you're stupid, or you're always messing everything up, you never do anything right. Maybe that's then further backed up by poor performance in school or at work. Or we all have these moments where somebody tells you something, or you read something, or you learn something,
Mhm.
and you think to yourself, like, wow, that's so simple. Why didn't I just know that? How did I not just come about that myself? And a series of those things over many years or a lifetime can lead someone to have very low self-esteem and a very bad view of themselves as, on an intellectual side. Oh, I'm not very smart, I'm stupid. I've never done anything right, I can never figure anything out. I talk to Jesse and he tells me all these things that are just like, why couldn't I think of that myself? And then on the other side, yes, you have, the individuals with very high self-esteem. They think that, oh, I'm so intelligent, I'm super intelligent. You are raised by saying, oh, you did such a good job today, no matter how you perform.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have, parents and individuals that are very supportive of a child,
Mhm.
regardless of how they perform.
Yeah.
And that can lead to that, like you were kind of alluding to, that false sense of intelligence, like, oh, I'm such an intelligent individual. And maybe on some levels they are, but other levels they aren't quite as intelligent or quite as good as what they believe they are,
Yeah, a little bit out
which
of touch with reality.
would also kind of be a bias in itself. But yeah, a lot of that has to do with like self-esteem, the way you were raised, life experiences, things like that.
Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna jump into a new topic. So there's been times in my life where I've become incredibly cynical. And at this point in my life, I'm not that cynical. Sometimes I get cynical when I'm more stressed or when I'm frustrated or kind of mentally or verbally blaming someone in my life or something, or blaming some conditions for that I'm experiencing personally. But every time I see someone getting cynical or that kind of has a tendency to be cynical, I I tend to get to some degree confused and perplexed in mentally trying to understand why humans kind of move into this kind of cynical worldview. If we look at biases as a type of uh, mutation, it's very mental. Cynicism, I mean, it's a philosophy, but it's also kind of a way of mentally functioning in the world. Like how does cynicism benefit the individual who's functioning from that headspace?
That's a good question. So I think a lot of cynicism is helpful in the moment for an individual because you're able to kind of blow off some steam. You're able to kind of maybe get out of a bad mental state, a bad headspace, but only in the moment. So if you think about it, a lot of times when you have these moments where you're blaming somebody for something or you're angry at somebody for a very minor incident, later you feel pretty bad about it. So I think the benefits of cynicism are kind of short-sighted in the fact that, yeah, okay, maybe in this moment I feel better about myself. I kind of blew off some steam, but you would have just been better off maybe trying to talk to that person and saying, like, hey, I didn't like what you said. I didn't like what you did.
Yeah,
Maybe, going into it a little bit more, maybe thinking before you open your mouth and thinking to yourself, okay, why did I get so angry about this? Why am I blaming this person? Why am I going to this headspace, this mental state now, and trying to think, because most of the time it's going to be you, yourself. Maybe it's just, you wake up, you're in a bad mood, there's something, maybe you failed to do something, you forgot to do something, whatever it is, and you're angry with yourself. And instead of being angry with yourself and, oh, why did I do that? Oh, you look to blame others, or you look to vent this anger and frustration, and you do it in the wrong way, like kind of a spur of the moment thing. So yeah, for me, cynicism wouldn't be beneficial for a person. It's beneficial in the moment, but most of the time, at some point after this happens, you're going to possibly feel worse than you did before you started.
so is cynicism always intertangled with our personal aggression, or is it something separate from aggression and sometimes intertangled with aggression?
So
Or
I think it'd be very individual of people. So I don't know this to be fact, but I would imagine you're more grumpy, aggressive type people would
Mhm,
probably be a little more cynical than somebody who's a little bit more relaxed, and somebody who is able to most of the times stop themselves and think, okay, why do I feel this way? Why am I so angry and frustrated right now? And then kind of
examine one's in the
yeah, exactly,
emotional
self
state.
examine,
Yeah.
yeah, and try to figure out what's the root of this anger and frustration.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks for enlightening me about cynicism. Okay, so the last two questions that I have are about America and China. So you've been living in China for how many years now? Like
15 years.
15 years. Okay.
Yeah,
And
in
you,
2007.
amazing. So you've been living here in China much longer than me, and we're both from America. So the first question is, what do you think Americans misunderstand about China most? Or maybe one thing that they really misunderstand about China. And then the second question is, how do you personally feel the American and Chinese relationship can become better, like as two collective groups? How can it become more harmonious? I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of misinformation on both sides. Uh, we get fed a lot of bullshit through the media, and a lot of people tend to believe some things that they hear. So a good example is I had some friends back home that also had a podcast, and I stumbled upon it one day and was like, oh, cool, like I know these guys. I went to high school with them,
Yeah.
and one of their podcasts was about China,
Yeah.
and a lot of the information that they were putting out in that podcast was either old or
Hmm.
just straight out wrong. There was a lot of
Hmm.
things there, and I've seen the same thing over here as well, with people where they ask you questions about the United States. Like they believe that everywhere you go in the United States, you're gonna get shot by somebody. There's gonna be a mass shooting at any moment. And as Americans, we kind of have that same thought about, like there's other parts of the world, for example, maybe Mexico or Brazil. You hear some bad things, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so dangerous there. And then you meet people from these countries, and they say, yeah, it happens, and there's parts of the country or wherever that are pretty dangerous, but overall, it's pretty safe. So I think a lot of that misinformation just is perpetuated through media, just to kind of prop themselves up while pushing down competition.
So they're exaggerating certain information or data or
Oh, for
facts,
sure,
and
for
that to try
sure.
to create a more entertaining type of news media and to attract people to come back again. And
Exactly,
that distorts people's realities and perceptions of the world and can lead to problems, unconceived problems.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we've seen that over the last 20 some years in news media. And
Yeah.
that also comes from the rise of the internet, because me and you could start a news website today,
Yeah.
and within a few years become almost as popular, if not more popular, than major media outlets. So they had to kind of resort to, okay, this is the group of people that watch us. This is what they believe. This is what they like. So we're
Yeah.
going to cater.
Comes back to confirmation bias.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It does. It comes back to confirmation bias. What do these people want to hear?
Full circle, baby. Okay, so then I personally feel like the relationship between Americans and Chinese is a little bit more tense than it's ever been in my life, but maybe I'm misperceiving the world. I guess that's the first question. Do you feel that way too, or no?
Well, okay, so it may be pretty tense on a diplomatic level.
Yeah.
between the countries, between governments. But I have not had a lot of bad experiences with Chinese people that have been
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't like you because you're American. We don't
Yeah.
like Americans here.
Me neither. Me neither.
America
Yeah.
America is saying bad things about China, so we don't like you because of that.
Yeah.
On a population wise, I don't think it's very tense because, as I just said, I've had very few, if any, bad experiences with people that are just like, oh, I don't like you because you're an American. And one thing that's really holding back better relations amongst the people, the population, is this language barrier. I mean, if you think about it, there's not, out of the total Chinese population, there's not that many people that are fluent English speakers. And if you think about the population of the United States, there's probably a much smaller percentage of Americans that are able to speak Chinese.
Yeah, and a large portion
So
of those that can speak Chinese are coming from Chinese backgrounds, and
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. And one thing, and this kind of ties into me as an English teacher, one thing that I've kind of always liked about teaching English is teaching this communication. So if you're able to teach two groups of people that maybe they're angry at each other for whatever reason, maybe there's some history there, a cultural or religious thing, and you teach these people to communicate and are able to talk to each other, I think most people would quickly realize that our differences are very small. Okay, you believe in this God, I believe in this God, but most of the things that we believe are the same. Okay, we do this culturally, we do this culturally. The things we do are different, but the reasons why we do these are the same. I want and need the same things that you do. And I think that communication is vital because that is going to alleviate a lot of this pressure around the world. Because once you get people talking to each other and communicating, I think we find very quickly that most people say, hey, I I was told that these people hate me for whatever reason. But
yeah,
now that I've talked to several of them, they say, well, we only hate you because we're told that you hate us for reason X, Y, and Z.
yeah,
And they quickly find out, like, hey, we're way more similar than we are different. Why are we fighting? Why are we angry at each other? We should be friends.
yeah. So communication is important, and in order to communicate, we need some kind of a common language. So both sides need some larger portions of the population to try to learn their fellow countrymen's language. More Americans need to try to learn Chinese, and maybe Chinese people need to continue trying to learn English, and then hopefully more positive and harmonious communication as a result of learning each other's languages.
Yeah. And I
Right
just
on.
happen to be lucky that I was born on a point on the earth where my native language just happens to be the language that when people come from two different places that don't speak each other's language, they try to speak my language.
Yeah,
So,
that's a very fortunate thing for us native
yeah,
English speaking people.
it is.
It may not always be like that, but hopefully, at least for now, it's fortunate. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, and have a nice day.